In the brutal, unforgiving skies of the First World War, an elite group of pilots known as aces captured the imagination of a war-weary world. None were more famous, more feared, or more revered than Germany's leading pilot, Baron Manfred von Richthofen. To his enemies, he was the Red Baron, a name that struck both terror and a grudging respect. To his countrymen, he was a living legend, a symbol of hope and defiance. He was a warrior who transcended the battlefield. His incredible record of 80 confirmed victories made him an international icon. His iconic crimson-painted plane was a beacon in the sky, a signal that a master of aerial combat was on the hunt. His very existence was a paradox, a symbol of grace and chivalry in a war of mechanized slaughter. But on one spring day in 1918, his myth came crashing down. In a low-altitude dogfight over a muddy field in France, the Red Baron was shot from the sky. His plane, the machine that had carried him to immortality, was a broken wreck. The death of the Red Baron should have been a simple conclusion to an epic story, a victory for the Allied forces to celebrate. But it was not. From the moment his body was found, the truth of his death became a riddle. The question of who fired the fatal shot became a mystery debated by soldiers, historians, and forensic experts for over a century. This is the story of the man, the myth, and the final, enduring question that has never truly been answered. Before he was the Red Baron, he was a young aristocrat named Manfred von Richthofen, born into a family of Prussian nobility. His early military career began not in the air, but on the ground as a cavalry officer. He was a skilled horseman, but the trench warfare of the Great War rendered cavalry charges obsolete. It was a new kind of war, and Richthofen sought a new kind of combat. In 1915, he transferred to the Imperial German Air Service. He was a student of combat, and he saw a new frontier in the skies. His early days as a pilot were not a sign of his future greatness. He was an average pilot, sometimes clumsy and prone to air sickness. But what he lacked in natural talent, he made up for in discipline and a cold, strategic mind. He approached aerial combat not as a chaotic dogfight, but as a calculated hunt. He studied the strengths and weaknesses of his enemies, analyzed their movements, and developed a set of tactics that would become his signature. He was a marksman, and he treated his plane like a sniper's rifle. His motto was, "Aim for the man, not the machine." His first confirmed victory came in September 1916. It was the start of an ascent that would shock the world. His methodical approach to combat began to yield an astonishing number of kills. His superiors took notice, and in early 1917, he was given command of his own squadron, Jagdgeschwader 1, which would soon be known to the world as the Flying Circus. This unit, composed of Germany's best and most daring pilots, was a terrifyingly effective force. It was with the Flying Circus that Richthofen painted his Albatross biplane a vibrant red. The color was a challenge, a taunt to his enemies. It was a declaration that he was in the sky and he was hunting. Soon, a sighting of the red plane sent a shiver of fear through Allied ranks. They knew that facing the Red Baron was not just a battle, it was a test against a master strategist, a pilot who had transformed aerial combat into a deadly art. His reputation was a weapon in its own right, and by April 1918, he had become the most celebrated warrior in the sky. In 1914, air power was a novelty. Planes were seen as little more than scouts, used to observe enemy movements from above. They were flimsy contraptions of wood, wire, and canvas, slow and unreliable. But as the static trench warfare of the Western Front ground on, the role of aviation changed. The skies became a new theater of operations, a terrifying three-dimensional battlefield where the rules were still being written. Combat evolved from pilots taking potshots with pistols at one another to choreographed, deadly maneuvers. The dogfight was born. Life as a fighter pilot was brief and brutal. Survival was a matter of skill, luck, and nerve. There was no parachute, no escape. Each mission was a gamble with fate, and the average lifespan of a pilot at the front was measured in weeks. It was in this unforgiving crucible that the concept of the ace emerged, a pilot who achieved 5 or more aerial victories. These men became the knights of the new age of warfare, celebrated heroes in a conflict that had few of them. Manfred von Richthofen was not just an ace, he was a phenomenon. His squadron, Jagdgeschwader 1, was a testament to his tactical genius. He handpicked the best flyers and trained them in a new kind of aerial doctrine. They were a unified force, operating as a coordinated pack of hunters rather than as individual duelists. Their planes, painted in garish colors and patterns, were a form of psychological warfare, a defiant flash of color against the somber gray of the battlefield. The Allied pilots quickly gave them a fitting name: the Flying Circus. The Flying Circus was a reflection of its commander's methodical mind. They flew in tight formations, providing mutual support and overwhelming their opponents with superior numbers. Their strategy was simple and devastatingly effective: conserve ammunition, outmaneuver the enemy, and make the killing shot a certainty. This discipline and precision separated Richthofen from his contemporaries and cemented his reputation, not just as a great fighter, but as the master of the skies. April 21st, 1918, dawned cold and overcast over the trenches of the Somme Valley. The great German spring offensive, which had promised to win the war, was faltering. On this day, the Flying Circus took to the air, led by its master, Manfred von Richthofen, still recovering from a severe head wound he had received months earlier. For over an hour, the pilots patrolled the skies, looking for a fight. Below, a frantic dogfight was underway between a young Canadian pilot, Lieutenant Wilfrid Wop May, and a German triplane. May, an inexperienced flyer, had orders to avoid combat. When his guns jammed, he broke away from the fight. It was a fatal mistake. From above, Richthofen saw the struggling Allied plane. For a hunter of his caliber, a lone, inexperienced pilot was an irresistible target. He swooped down, his triplane's nose pointed directly at May's tail. He disregarded one of his own cardinal rules: never pursue an enemy too far behind the front lines, and never fly low enough to be a target for ground fire. The chase took them over the vast, cratered no man's land and toward the positions of the Australian infantry. The pursuit was relentless. Richthofen, consumed by the hunt, closed in for the kill, his guns blazing. But as he flew low, his bright red plane became a cleared target. Down below, the Australian gunners, armed with machine guns, saw their chance. They opened fire on the legendary ace. Suddenly, without a sound, the red triplane shuddered. The barrage of bullets from the ground had found its mark. The plane veered away from its target and began to descend, an erratic, spiraling fall. Moments later, it came to a rest, skidding into a muddy field and coming to a gentle halt. The engine was silent. The crowd of Allied soldiers who had witnessed the chase ran toward the downed aircraft, full of a mix of awe and grim anticipation. They did not find a triumphant hero, they found a legend with a single fatal wound. The crash site quickly became a scene of morbid curiosity and profound respect. The Australian soldiers, who had witnessed the final moments of the dogfight, rushed to the downed plane, expecting to find a machine gunner. Instead, they found the legendary Red Baron slumped in the cockpit. The man who had been their most feared enemy was now simply a pilot, his face showing no sign of struggle, just a quiet surrender to his fate. The myth had come face to face with a fragile, mortal reality. The soldiers, hardened by years of brutal trench warfare, showed a surprising level of reverence. They carefully removed his body from the wreckage, and a single officer, Captain Donald Fraser, retrieved his pilot's helmet and his binoculars. There was no act of desecration, no triumphal display. The Allied forces, in a rare moment of shared humanity, treated their fallen foe with the same honor they would have shown their own. Richthofen's body was taken to a nearby hangar, where it was laid out for examination by the Australian medical staff. The single bullet wound was small but perfectly placed, entering his side and exiting near his chest. It was a wound that, in the chaotic environment of a dogfight, seemed impossibly precise. It was a detail that would later ignite 100 years of debate. 2 days later, on a hill near the French village of Bertangles, the Red Baron was given a full military funeral. Allied officers carried his coffin, and a single squadron of British planes flew overhead in a final, respectful salute. His death was a victory, but it was a quiet one. The German High Command did not officially learn of this fate for days. For them, the hero was simply missing in action. For the Allies, his end was a testament to the skill and bravery of their own forces, a victory that would be claimed and reclaimed for generations to come. The quiet, respectful burial of the Red Baron was the last moment of shared humanity. Almost immediately, the circumstances of his death became a battleground for competing narratives. The official story from the Allied High Command was that the famous Canadian pilot, Captain Roy Brown, was responsible. Brown was celebrated as a hero, but in the chaos of the battle and his own emotional state, he was uncertain. "I knew it was my turn to get him," he later said, "and I was going to get him." His account, however, was quickly challenged by a simple but undeniable detail: the entry wound. The bullet that killed Richthofen entered his right side and exited his left at a sharp upward angle. This trajectory was the central piece of forensic evidence. While Captain Brown was above and behind Richthofen during the final chase, the angle of the wound suggested a shot from below and in front. The bullet's path was almost impossible for an aerial kill from a pilot chasing from above. This contradiction immediately cast doubt on the official narrative and opened the door to the first major theory, that a ground gunner fired the fatal shot. On the ground below, 2 Australian machine gunners, Sgt Cedric Popkin and gunner Robert Buey, claimed they had fired at the low-flying red triplane. Their position, a field near the crash site, put them in a perfect spot to deliver a shot that would match the angle of the wound. Their machine guns were known to fire an incredible number of rounds per minute, making it plausible that one of their bullets could have hit the moving target. Their claim was a direct challenge to the aerial combat narrative, suggesting that the most feared ace in the world was not defeated by a rival pilot, but by an anonymous soldier. The debate raged for decades. For many, the idea that a hero of the skies was brought down by a lowly foot soldier was a far less romantic story than a dogfight between equals. But forensic science offered no simple answers. The bullet itself was never found, and ballistics technology of the time was too crude to make a definitive judgment. eyewitness accounts were conflicting and often based on the chaos of the moment. The mystery of the final shot became an enigma that fueled a century of historical debate. Was the official hero, Captain Brown, a fraud? Or was he simply a part of a larger, more complicated truth? This ambiguity would become the enduring legacy of the Red Baron's death, a riddle of competing claims and forensic contradictions. But beyond these two main theories, a third, often overlooked possibility existed. A possibility that no one wanted to admit. The first and most celebrated theory is that the Red Baron was defeated in a true aerial dogfight, vanquished by an opponent of equal skill. That man, according to the official Allied account, was Captain Roy Brown of the Royal Air Force. Brown had been a close observer of the dogfight from the very beginning. His teammate, Lieutenant Wilfred May, was the young pilot the Baron was mercilessly pursuing. It was a matter of honor and duty for Brown to intervene. Brown, a seasoned fighter, dove his plane into the melee, firing a burst of machine gun fire at Richthofen's tail. He later claimed that as he pulled away, he saw the red plane shudder and descend. He believed, with an understandable sense of triumph, that his shot had been the fatal one. To the Allied command, his account was the perfect narrative. The most feared German ace had been brought down by a Canadian hero, a symbol of Allied bravery and skill. For his actions, Brown was immediately and publicly credited with the kill and became a celebrity in his own right. For decades, the story of Captain Brown remained the accepted version of events. But the forensic evidence, as we've seen, told a different story. The autopsy of Richthofen's body revealed a single clean bullet wound entering his side and angling sharply upwards. A shot fired from a plane above and behind, like the one Captain Brown fired, would have had a different trajectory. It would have entered the Baron's back and traveled downward. The angle of the wound suggested the shot came from below. This forensic contradiction presented a major flaw in Captain Brown's claim. Was he simply mistaken in the chaos of the moment? Or was he so desperate to protect his friend, Wilfred May, from the vengeful wrath of the Germans that he had a plausible excuse for shooting at a plane behind enemy lines? Either way, the angle of the bullet cast a long, enduring shadow of doubt on the official hero. It was this doubt that gave rise to a second and far more compelling theory. If Captain Brown was not the one to fire the fatal shot, then who was? The forensic evidence, the one unshakable piece of the puzzle, pointed not to the sky, but to the ground. The bullet's upward trajectory, entering the Baron's side and exiting his chest, perfectly matched the firing angle of a machine gun on a hill below. The prime suspects for this claim were a pair of Australian machine gunners, Sgt Cedric Popkin and his partner, who were positioned in a trench directly in the line of the chase. Popkin's story was both simple and powerful. He had seen the red plane chasing the Canadian aircraft at extremely low altitude. He aimed his Vickers machine gun, which was known for its accuracy, and opened fire. The burst was quick, a mere few seconds. A moment later, he saw the plane swerve and go down. His account, unlike Captain Brown's, was not based on the chaos of a dogfight, but on the cold, clear perspective of an observer on the ground. When he heard that an Australian unit was credited with the kill, he immediately knew it had to be his. The evidence for Popkin's claim was compelling. The forensic report on the body of the Red Baron confirmed the shot was fired from below. Furthermore, the distance was entirely plausible. Popkin's position was less than 500 yards from where the plane eventually crashed, a manageable range for a machine gun. However, even this theory was not without its own contradictions. The Australian High Command, eager to claim a victory over the legendary ace, was quick to credit the kill to Popkin's unit. But some argued that the machine gunners were too far away for such a precise shot, and others claimed that the Baron's plane showed no visible signs of being hit by a barrage of bullets. The debate raged for years, creating a rift between the aerial heroes and the ground forces. The most decorated pilot of the war had been shot down, but his final adversary remained a mystery. As historians debated the two main theories, a third possibility, less known but no less compelling, remained in the shadows. This theory suggests that the man who killed the Red Baron was neither a celebrated ace nor a ground machine gunner, but a more anonymous figure, a lone soldier whose account was lost in the chaos of war. This third theory centers on a single bullet. The wound on Richthofen's body was not caused by a machine gun's large-caliber round, but by a smaller, more common rifle bullet. One soldier, an Australian rifleman named Gunner Bowie, was in the same company as Sgt Popkin. He was positioned in a different part of the trench system, and he too fired at the red plane with his standard issue .303 rifle. The forensic analysis conducted years after the war, with modern technology, suggested that the bullet's characteristics were more consistent with a rifle round than a machine gun round. Furthermore, there was a quiet testimony from another anonymous soldier who was nearby, who claimed he saw the Red Baron look down at his stomach and clutch his side just moments before the plane went down. It was this testimony that gave the third theory a human face. A single, well-aimed shot from a rifle, from a soldier who was simply doing his job and not seeking fame or glory. This third theory, though less dramatic than a dogfight between two heroes or a machine gunner's lucky shot, is in many ways the most tragic and likely of all. It suggests that the greatest flying ace of the First World War was not defeated by a rival, but by a single, common soldier whose name was lost to history. The man who was a symbol of air power, grace, and chivalry was brought down by the very thing he was trying to rise above: the brutal, faceless reality of trench warfare. His death was not an epic conclusion. It was a simple, anticlimactic act of war. After a century of debate, countless books, and a mountain of conflicting evidence, can we ever truly know who killed the Red Baron? The riddle of the fatal shot is a puzzle with many pieces, but they do not all fit together. Historians and forensic experts today have largely come to a consensus, not on a single hero, but on a probable truth. The official story of Captain Roy Brown, while romantic, does not stand up to the most basic forensic evidence. The angle of the wound, a fact no one can dispute, makes a shot from his position nearly impossible. This leaves us with the ground gunners, and the compelling evidence that points directly to them. Sgt Cedric Popkin's account is the most plausible. His position on the ground, his use of a machine gun, and the trajectory of the bullet all align with the physical evidence. While the honor of a single heroic victory was given to a pilot, the reality is that the master of the skies was almost certainly brought down by a man on the ground, a man whose name was a footnote in the grand story of the war. The myth of the Red Baron's death was a story the world needed to believe. A myth of a duel between equals, not the brutal, faceless reality of mechanized slaughter. But the truth is more complicated, and in many ways more poignant. The man who had risen above the trenches was ultimately brought down by them, a casualty of the very ground war he had tried to escape. The mystery of how the Red Baron died will likely never be fully solved. The true legacy of his final flight is not in a single bullet, but in the enduring power of his story. His death marked the end of an era, the era of the heroic ace and the gentleman warrior. His legend was so powerful that even his enemies treated his death with respect. A final salute to an adversary who had fought with honor in a world that had forgotten the meaning of the word. For a nation that was crumbling under the weight of a losing war, his death was a tragedy, but his myth was an inspiration. For the Allied forces, his fall was a long-awaited victory, a symbol that even the most unbeatable enemy could be defeated. The Red Baron's last flight was a conclusion to his life, but it was just the beginning of his legend. His story, wrapped in mystery and legend, continues to soar in history. It is a powerful reminder that sometimes the real story is not the victory itself, but the unanswered questions that it leaves behind. It is a story that proves that even in an age of machines and mass warfare, a single man's courage can become a legend that will live forever.